In the last video, we talked about the Azure file chain. So in this video, we'll talk about the security firewall settings under the storage account. So how we can secure the storage account from a public access, or from how do we can ensure that the storage account is accessible only from the Azure networks. So when we create a storage account, I'm just taking an example of an encrypt a storage account core.windows.net. So when we create any kind of a storage account in Azure, so Azure will create a public IP address. So it'll create a public IP address. Some, for the sake of example, I'm taking some IP like in a 20.10.10.10.1, 0.1. And it'll create a DNS record pointing that Venkat stac.blob.core.windows.net is pointing to a 20.10.101.10. And by default, which is called as an public access is enabled. Public access is enabled. What does that mean by it? Public access has been enabled means. So whoever has a permissions on the storage account, so they can access the storage account from anywhere. Either they can be on a personal home laptop, or could be an office laptop, or could be a home network, or could be an personal office network, or could be a client network, irrespective of this location, and is irrespective of the network, as long as the user has a permissions to access the storage account, they can access it. Now, could be a tool like an Storage Explorer, or could be some other tool which we can use to access the storage account. So that will enable us to access it. So what is the risk with this one? So when we mean by public access is enabled, so the storage account blobs might have some kind of a confidential data, could be some kind of an a personal data, or could be some like a PHA data, or could be whatever we call it as a compliance data. But this is really not required to be accessible from outside. Let's say there is a business case where we see that we want to store some kind of information in our Azure storage account, but that is not really required to be accessible from outside. Now, when we are storing files, so any user can go and access that particular files from the personal laptop, from the home, and which would cause some kind of a compliance and other issues. So how can we secure this? How can we secure this? Now, when we create a storage account, let me go and create a storage account. So I'm creating a storage account. I'm giving it Venkat storage account. I'm just saying review and create. To create. While this is getting created, let me log into the other two Azure virtual machines I have created. I'm taking other virtual machine created in Azure. I'm trying to take, so we're trying to access the storage account from 3 different networks just for testing purpose. So I logged into the Azure virtual machines which are there in Azure, and this PC which I'm operating is at my home, and I have, let me connect to the another network which is my lab network. Let me go to the storage account which we created. Now we got a storage account. So I see Venkat STAC, and let's go to the settings called as security networking. And we would see public network access enabled from all the networks. So I'm going to a data storage, a containers. I'm creating a container. I'm giving get a project A, create it. I'm creating one more container, project B. So I'm trying to upload files into the container from my local laptop. So as there are no restrictions from the perspective of network, I'm able to upload files. So I'm going to an Azure virtual machine. Azure virtual machine. Let me log into this. I'm logging into the Azure portal. Let me enter the code. So I'm just signing into the Azure portal. So I'm going to the storage account, and I would see this storage account. And when I navigate to the containers, so I will be able to access the data. I'm trying to upload some kind of a file. Let me go to the downloads or C drive something just for a testing purpose. I'm just uploading this folder. Okay, there is no files, log files, there's nothing, plugins, nothing is there. Okay, let me take a log file or something. I'm trying to upload a file. So I'm able to access from an Azure virtual machine, which is in a different network. I'm going to my and a machine which is there in my an office network, lab machine, lab network. So I'm portal.azure.com. Let me go to storage account. I'm going to containers. So I'm trying to access the container. So I would be able to access the container. And I'm trying to upload a file. Some kind of a file. So as a default, when we create a storage account, so it is public access is enabled. It means that there are no restrictions. As long as the user has the permissions, he can access the storage account from anywhere. But we want to have some kind of an access restrictions from a perspective of a network. Okay, even though the user has the permissions, he should not be able to access it from an home network or outside of the corporate network. He should be able to access only from the and as a corporate network. Now, so this is a storage account. I'm giving Venkat storage account dot blob dot core dot windows.net and created in Azure. So we have called as in restrictions. So when we go to the storage account under networking, click on manage public access or this thing. So public network access is enabled. So when we click on disable, so this storage account will not be accessible from anywhere, either from the corporate network, either from the and home network or anything. It will not be accessible anywhere. But I'll tell you later when in which kind of situations we can use it. But now, so when I have a public network access enabled, down we can see enable from all networks. So by default, the public access is enabled and allowed from all networks. Now we have enabled from selected networks. So when I give enable from selected networks means we can specify from which particular IP addresses this particular storage account can be accessible. Now I'll come to the virtual networks. We see IP addresses. Now we can specify the IP addresses from which the storage account can be accessible. Now I'm just getting my IP address. So my IP address is this one. I'm copying this IP address and I'm pasting it. So with an option called as enable from selected networks, the first thing is then we can restrict the access to the storage account to a specific IPs. So now I restricted this storage account to a specific public IP. So I'm going to a storage account. I'm going to containers. I'm trying to navigate containers. I'm able to access it. I'm moving to the my lab network. I'm going to the storage account. I'm trying to access the storage account from a machine which is in a different network. I go to the containers. I click on a container. Okay. Now we can see that the request is not authorized to perform this operation. From which particular network I'm accessing this one? So 183.82.0.73. So I'm trying to access this storage account from a different IP address. So when I try it, even though I have a permissions on the container, but when I try to access the content, It is not available. Now I'm going to the Azure virtual machine, which is there in a different network. We already logged into the Azure portal. I'm clicking on a storage account. I'm clicking on a file, containers. I'm clicking on a project here. Now we see an error called as the request is not authorized to perform this operation. Now I'm taking in a public IP address of my other virtual machine, which is in the lab network. I'm allowing in the storage account. So now let me go to the storage account, networking, manage public access. I'm giving one more IP address. So now I'm restricting access to the storage account from two public IP addresses. Now in this network, there could be multiple machines. And under this network, under this IP address, there could be different machines which are coming in. All they can access it. Any machine which is coming from this public IP address will be able to access this one. Now, I'm able to access the storage account from this machine. I'm going to my lab machine. I'm going to, earlier we were getting this message. Now I allowed this particular IP address. Go here, click on project A. Now we would see that we are able to access it. So we can now are able to access the storage account. Now let me go to the Azure virtual machines. Now we have not allowed this IP address. Let me go to this one. Let me go to the project here. Now we see that access is denied. Now this way, on the storage account, we can restrict access to the storage account based on the public IP addresses, based on public IP addresses. Now let's understand from the virtual network. Now, let me go to the virtual networks. I create a virtual network. I have two subnets created under this virtual network. And I have these two virtual machines which I created or in this virtual network. So when I go to the first virtual machine, we can see VNet default subnet. When I go to second virtual machine, it is available VNet/default. So now this is a storage account. So I allowed access from a public IP address and allowed access from another public IP. Now based one option is based on the public IPs, which we are able to allow access to the storage account. But if there is an Azure virtual network, and we need what we call as a virtual network, and if you have a subnets and you have the virtual machines available, now these machines, a VM1, VM2, VM2, and VM3. VM3. So I'm going to the VM1. I'm trying to ping this storage account. So let me take the name of the storage account. I'm ping Venkat stac dot blob dot core dot windows.net. Now we see that it is pointing to a public IP address. Now when these machines try to access a storage account, so when I log into this machine and try to access a storage account, it will not get accessible because we have not allowed this virtual machines. We allowed the public IP address of another machines, and through which we were able to access the storage account. We are able to access the storage account. But there are a lot of other virtual machines which are sites within the Azure virtual network. Now we want these virtual machines to be accessed to access the storage account. Now in this case, what we can do is that, so we can connect this, we can configure that the storage account can be accessible from this particular virtual networks and all the subnets, or from a specific subnet within this particular virtual machine. So now when you enable an option called as an public access enabled and enable from selected virtual networks, selected networks. So we can specify the public IP addresses, and as well as we can connect the storage account we can access from the specific virtual networks, the resources which resides within this particular one. Now I'm going to the storage account. Now here we can see add a virtual network. Add an existing virtual network. I already have a virtual network. I'm selecting the virtual network. So do you want to allow from all the subnets, or do you want to allow from a specific subnet? Now I'm saying a specific subnet default. Now I'm enabling an access to your storage account from a virtual network from specific subnet, not from all the other subnets. Now you can refer to the virtual networks videos if you have any confusion on the virtual networks, and you can practice there. So under one virtual network, we can have a multiple subnets. So now what I did here now on the storage account, so I enabled only one subnet, only one subnet. Now I have one more subnet. So I have not enabled the other subnet which is there on this particular one. Now the storage account should be accessible from these two public IP addresses and a virtual machine or the resources which are existing within this subnet. So I'm saying add, save the settings, save the settings. Now I'm going to the storage account. We allowed this IP address. We should be able to access from this machine, the container. I'm able to access. I'm going to my lab machine. We have allowed the public IP address of the lab machine. I'm able to access it. I'm going to the virtual machine 1, which we allowed the access to the storage account, containers, project A. Now I'm able to access it because we have allowed here. I'm going to project B. I'm able to access it. I'm going to second virtual machine, which is part of other subnet. Now let me try to access it. from here. So I'm trying to log into an Azure portal from a virtual machine, which is residing on the Azure virtual network. I'm going to a storage account. I'm clicking on a project here. Now we see that this request is not authorized to perform this operation. Now what happened here now? So we allowed access only from this subnet, not from this subnet. We allowed access from this VM public IP, from other machine public IP, from this virtual network subnet, we allowed. But a virtual machine which is there, another subnet, is not able to access this storage account. Now I'm going to storage account. I'm going to manage public access. Now I'm adding in one more subnet. I'm saying that default to enable. I'm saving it. Now we have allowed access from this subnet and this subnet also. Now the other virtual machine which is giving an error. Now this should be able to allow access. Now I'm going to project here. Now we see that we are able to access it. Now this way, we can use a feature called as a public access enabled from selected networks. So this option will enable us wherein we can restrict the storage account to accessible from a specific IP addresses and specific Azure virtual network. Now what is happening here now? Still, the storage account is accessible from internet on specific public IP addresses. But my requirement is I don't want the storage account to be accessible from an internet. I want to completely disable access to the internet from the internet. Now, when we disable public access, now we disable public access. So when we disable public access, now that storage account will not be accessible from anywhere because the storage account is having a public IP. Now I go to the browser, a storage account. I'm opening a container. I'm getting an error. I'm going to my lab machine. I'm refreshing the container. I'm getting error message. I'm going to Azure virtual machine. Azure virtual machine. And from there, I'm trying to access the container. I see that. Now what happened here now? When we disable a public access, so that a storage account will not be accessible either from the public networks or from Azure virtual networks, because this storage account is having a public IP address associated with that one. And when this machine is trying to access this machine, that also try to access over the public IP. But the Azure is a storage account is in Azure and virtual machines are in Azure. But still, when we try to access the storage account, it always go through the public network, which is internet, and try to access the storage account using the public IP. As we disabled public access, as we disabled the public access, it will not allow from anywhere. Now, what is the requirement for us now? My requirement is the storage account should not be accessible from the public network. I don't want the storage account to be accessible from public network. But I want the storage account to be accessible from Azure Virtual Network. Now, by disabling the public access, so we lost the connectivity to the storage account. Now we are not able to access from anywhere. So there is no use because we want to store the data and access it. It means that from somewhere it should be accessible. So we want that to be accessible from virtual networks. Now for this, so what Azure is provided called as a private endpoint. We use option called as a private endpoint. So what is this private endpoint is it? So Azure will create one network interface, a private network interface, which can connect to Azure virtual network and can have a private IP address and a private DNS name, which can be resolved from the Azure virtual network. So this private endpoint will enable us to access the storage account from Azure virtual network and connect that storage account to your virtual network. So I'm going to a storage account. Let me go to the virtual network first. And I'm going to virtual network. I'm creating one subnet where I can connect that. I'm calling it as a storage account. So I created this a subnet. I'm going to storage network. a storage networking. We see called as a private endpoints. Private endpoints. So private endpoint is more of like creating a private a network interface card for that storage account and assigning a public private IP address and creating a private a DNS name. So I'm creating a private endpoint. I'm giving it a private net called as a Venkat STAC private endpoint. Select the resource. I'm saying a blob resource for which I want to create it. Select under which network you want to connect the virtual network interface card. So I'm selecting a storage. Automatically create a DNS record. Review and create. And create. Now what we are creating here, we are creating a private interface to the storage account and attaching that interface to a subnet and assign a private IP address. So once we have a private endpoint created for a storage account, so that storage account is accessible from the Azure virtual network, from the Azure virtual network. Now let this get created. So when we have a private endpoint created, then the public access will not work. So you cannot have both. Either you can have a public access enabled or you can have a private endpoint. So you cannot have both like a public access or a private access. So I'm going to the, let's it got created. Let me go to the storage account while it is creating the private endpoint. It would take a couple of minutes because it has to create a network interface card. Then it has to attach that network interface cost to your storage account and connect to your virtual network, then assign to the subnet. So there are some sequence of steps which it would perform. And for that particular purpose, it would take some roughly around 2 to 5 minutes of time to create a private endpoint. Now, this private endpoint is available on all the resources in a platform as a service components like Azure SQL Server, Azure Data Factory, or Azure or whatever storage or backup, or like many services where you can have a private endpoint where you can connect these platform as a services to your virtual network. Go, sorry. Earlier we got a public IP address. Now, after creating a private endpoint, when I try to ping the same storage account within that network, then it gives a private IP address. Now we would see here a private NIC code got created, a private IP address is being assigned, and DNS record got created. It means that, so when we connect this storage account to a virtual network and to a subnet, so it will create a private NIC card and gets. Now from within this virtual network, all these resources can use the same storage account to communicate with the storage account, and it will be accessible. Now it got a private name. So I'm going to the storage account. I'm clicking on this one. Now I see that I'm able to access it from the Azure virtual machine. I'm going to another Azure virtual machine. I'm trying to access this one. I'm able to access it. But now I'm going to the lab machine, which is outside of my Azure network. And I go to the container. It should deny me access. I see that there is a deny access. And I'm in the local PC, which is outside of the Azure network. So from here also, I'm trying to access the storage account. Container, it should give me an error because it is also not in the Azure virtual network. Now, in this kind of situations, we can create a private endpoint, and that can be accessible only from the Azure virtual network. As long as we don't need a storage account to be accessible from internet, then we can create a private endpoint. Okay, so this way we can use all these options where you can use called as a public access enabled. Now you have a private endpoint. And what if enabled from all networks? Now what happens here now? Private endpoint doesn't make any sense because you enabled from any networks. Then the private endpoint doesn't make any sense because you are allowing from anywhere and you're connecting through the public IP and enable from all networks or enable from specific networks. Okay. Now, so you have to choose whether you want to have an option public access enabled with all networks or selected networks and IP addresses, or disable public access and access only through the private endpoint. That way you can use this networking feature in this firewall or on the storage account.